What's up everybody, welcome back to the channel. Today I've got a new dungeon guide for you, and that's going to be Thaurisgar, the Vile Apothecary. Now this is going to be on tier 3. Now something I want to mention before starting this guide is that these guides are intended for a broad audience, so that players that may not be super familiar with skills, abilities, shorthand terms, or maybe don't have the greatest gear don't feel as intimidated by doing harder content. So to some players this may be overkill, but to others it may be information needed to get them over the hump. Now this guide can be used for really any tier, but it's intended for tiers 3 through 5. The mechanics in tiers 3 through 5 don't change, and the only thing that you really have to account for are scions in tiers 4 and 5. Now our group setup for this run is going to be a blue warden is tanking, a blue minstrel healing, and a yellow champ for damage. Now, AoE damage in this dungeon is really good, as most pools have several enemies to deal with. Also, depending on how comfortable your group is and your composition, you may be able to make larger pools even in higher tiers. There's no rush or race in this dungeon, so make sure you're pulling what you're comfortable with. Now keep in mind this is being run on tier 3 in this video, and every enemy will have the tier 3 modifier of plus 200% morale and damage, and plus 35% armor and ratings to avoidance, resistance, and armor penetration. This is where overcapping some of your stats come into play, because you can account for those buffs in your mitigations. You can check out the values in the graph over on LOTRO wiki to know what your overcap value should be for your class. Now let's get into the content of the dungeon. There are several different types of enemies in this dungeon. We have the Thaurisgar trolls, which are elites, Thaurisgar warriors, which are signatures, defilers that are normal mob types, and throwers that are a swarm type mob. The enemy that you should really be aware of most of the time are the trolls. They have a stacking buff called momentum. Each stack of momentum will give the troll plus 10% melee damage, plus 54,116 critical rating, minus 10% attack duration, and plus 10% run speed. And like I said, this buff can stack multiple times, so if you want to be aware of how many they have. Fortunately, there is a way to handle these buffs. Any type of immobilize will stop their momentum and remove all buffs, and they will start over. While it might be normal to stun a mob right away, I would recommend letting the buffs get up to a 2 or 3 and then stun to remove. It can also be helpful having a plugin to track the temporary state immunity, so you can keep them stunned for as often as you need. Some groups may need to do this more often than others. There is a debuff that the troll puts out called fungal infection, and this can tier up to tier 5, with tier 5 refreshing on expiration. It's not really a big deal, as it is just a small disease resistance reduction, and it's not a problem if you don't remove it, but it is a good habit to remove any bad effects anyway, and it's good practice for when it does matter. The trolls also do a knockback, so be careful where you're facing so you don't get knocked back into another pool of enemies. The last thing to know about the trolls is that they can put out an area effect called Spore Cloud. Again, this is not a huge concern, as even when it tiers up to tier 2, it only debuffs you for 2,450 might and vitality. It is also possible that if you are damaging the trolls and they are near death, they may just do an induction and explode, causing more disease-based damage. Next in the priority is the warriors and the defilers. Now they can both do an induction-based locked frontal cleave. You can avoid this damage by simply running through them before the induction goes off. The warriors can also inflict a sprain on you that will slow you by 30% and reduce your evade rating by 119,000. So not bad by itself, but if you get this combined with the troll speed and damage buffs, you might be taking some pretty unnecessary damage. Now the last mob that's really nothing to worry about is the thrower. The only thing that they really do is root you, making it so that the other enemies can do all of their abilities on you easier. These guys should probably die just with normal AoE damage, and you really don't need to focus on them. After you go up the ramp and throw the lever to open the door to the downstairs, you will have some additional pulls before you can get to the Cauldron puzzle. Now this puzzle has 4 variations based on Aniochan's note on the left side of the platform. If you look around the corners of the bottom floor, there will be different colored braziers lit. These different colored braziers correspond to different patterns within the note. The red brazier in the southeast corner is number 1, the blue brazier is in the northwest corner is 2, the green brazier in the northeast is 3, and the yellow brazier in the southwest is 4. Once you figure out which pattern it is for that run, simply use the cauldrons in that order in the note, and the next door will open and the chest will appear. The next hallway is just more of the same mobs that you've already encountered. The last pull before the boss room is the only one that can sometimes be tricky with 2 trolls in the group. If you need to, fear or mez one and take one at a time. More proficient groups may pull the entire hallway, but remember, there are no points for speed and style in this. Now comes the final encounter of this dungeon with the 2 Earthkin, Kursija and Kurja. Now something important to know about this fight is the yellow eye that Kursija puts out that can be a one-shot for characters that don't have a good amount of mitigations and morale. So don't be surprised if you get the yellow eye above your head and a few seconds later are looking at the ground. This is not something you can line of sight, but there have been some people that claimed certain locations around the room provide safety, but I've never been able to confirm it, and quite honestly, just get those mitigations and morale into a good spot and it's a non-issue. One other note about the yellow eye is that it is a proximity effect. So if you are within about 7 meters from another player, they are going to get the full effect from that ability as well. There are a couple different approaches to this fight, in that some players will attack the bile tanks at the same time as Kurja to speed up the process. However, if you are struggling with this fight, use a more controlled approach in dealing with Kurja first. Now Kurja does a couple of attacks that the whole group needs to be aware of. The first is a simple knockout, which you can use your class release skill to wake up from. The next thing you need to watch out is for a gray bar induction for Vile Bile Pile. This attack will always occur in front of Kurja and is frontal locked, meaning once the induction starts, the enemy will never change its direction for the attack. The tank can move through the boss and move back after the attack goes off. Almost immediately after this, there is another gray bar induction called More Bile Pile. This attack will always happen behind the boss and is also direction locked. In this case, the other 2 party members will need to move through the boss to the front so that they don't take any unnecessary damage. Once the attack goes off, they can move back. Now, during this time, the yellow eye attack and knockout can still be happening. So positioning is important so that your team doesn't take unnecessary damage constantly. Rinse and repeat until Kurja is defeated. Now dealing with Kursija can be annoying. He will move between the 3 bile tanks, and the timing between it is very inconsistent. So while you'll think you might be about to explode one of the bile tanks to damage the boss, he ends up moving and then you waste a bile tank. Now something that has helped out in lower damage groups is to bring the bile tanks down to about half or 1/3 of the morale and then move to another tank. When Kursija moves to a tank that has already been damaged more than halfway, then finish it off to explode the bile tank and damage the boss. You'll need to repeat this several times to finish the encounter. Again, the yellow eye will still periodically go off, but shouldn't really be a big issue at this point. There you have it. You've completed Thaurisgar, the Vile Apothecary on tier 3. As I said at the beginning of this video, this strat is the same for higher tiers. You just need to watch out for the scions and deal with those accordingly. Now, if you found this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more video guides like this in the future. Thanks, and good luck on your loot.